So the first Constitution of the United States was called the Articles of Confederation. If we go back to, remember we were talking about the options that were available to the framers when they were instituting a new government. The unitary system, they said, nah, we're not doing this. If you think about it, since they came from a situation where the national government had a whole bunch of power and the state government had none, it probably makes sense that what they said is, let's do the opposite thing. And so the Articles of Confederation are the framers' attempt to go ahead, there's the Articles of Confederation, to do this. That didn't work. Let's try the opposite. Let's have the states be in charge. We already saw what happens if you stick the national government in charge. They're abusive. They violate your rights. Let's have the state governments be in charge, and we'll do it that way instead. And so the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, set up that exact thing. So I want to talk a little bit about the national government, then we'll talk about the structure of the Articles of Confederation. So this is the way the government in the United States was run immediately after the adoption of the Articles of Confederation. First, in terms of the executive branch, right? The executive, the president, had very little power. There shouldn't be a colon there. There should be a there should be a colon there. Just here's the idea: the president had no power. The president was basically a clerk, an errand boy for Congress. The president didn't have any independent power of his own. It wasn't like our presidents now. The president was very weak. There was no power that the presidents had. In terms of the legislative branch, at the national level, the legislative branch, their version of Congress, had no power to resolve disputes between states. If there was a disagreement between one of the states, the federal government couldn't get involved. It had no power to tell the states what to do. It had no power to create an army or a navy. Written in the document, they don't have the power to create an army or a navy. Each state had its own army and navy, and there were times when states actually went to war with one another. The federal government couldn't do anything. They could not force the states to pay any taxes. There were two states that, for the entire duration of the Articles of Confederation, I don't remember which ones, never paid any taxes to the federal government. Well, if you haven't any taxes, then you haven't any money. And if you haven't any money, you can't do anything. That's how weak the legislative branch was. And the way they voted is that there were 13 states, right? Each state had one vote. Now, back in the day, there were big states, very powerful states, and there were small states. If you have one state, if every state in Congress, so it's not like, so every state gets one vote. So there's 13 votes altogether in Congress. That's the way. Anything that gets voted on, 13 votes. If you have one state, one vote, who benefits from that arrangement? The larger states or the small states? You're correct. Why do the small states benefit?
The large states can, overpower the little states. So if all the large states say we want to have economic policies that benefit large states but screw over small states say, no, that's not going to work, and then they veto it or they vote against it, and it's a level playing field.
Exactly. So small states can stop it. On top of which, to pass a law required 9 of the 13 states to vote in favor of it. So the small states could basically stop anything from passing if they wanted to. On top of which, because Congress, the legislative branch, was so weak, some states didn't even send representatives. So you might have representatives from 8 states, and a couple of states like, we're not going to bother sending anybody right now. Very hard to get 9 votes when there's only 8 people there, right? It was totally weak. It was designed to be weak. And then in terms of the judicial branch, there was no Supreme Court of the United States. There was no Supreme Court at all. Each state had its own court system, and they were expected to make the decisions. That's the way the system was run. So there were a variety of problems with the Articles of Confederation, and that's why they collapsed. So this will be the last thing we talk about, and then we'll stop, and then we'll go over the notes, the answers to the chapter 2. So in terms of the main problems with the Articles of Confederation, the first and the most fundamental one was that the federal government was so weak. There were problems that the states couldn't resolve, and if they turned to the federal government, there was nothing that the federal government could do. Do you guys remember reading about Shays' Rebellion? Right, in Shays' Rebellion, for those of you who don't remember, what happens is, there's been a war for independence, and the people who fought the war were citizens, farmers, who left their farms to go fight the British, and then won, amazingly enough. And they were promised that when they came back, everything would still be intact. And in fact, they went back, they fought the war, they came back, they went back to their farms, but the economy was in terrible shape. We'd just gotten out of a war. Our main trading partner, the British, we were no longer on good terms with. The economy was just a mess. And so you had these rebellions. So what this was this is in western Massachusetts, you have these farmers who the banks are foreclosing on their farms. And when I talk about foreclosing on a farm, what do I mean? We have taking away from them. They're unable to make their payments for the loan that the bank gave them. And so the bank is basically saying, you know what, you didn't make your payments, we're taking back your farm. These guys go and they fight a war, they win a war, they come back heroes, and before they know it, now the courts are going ahead and saying, you know what, the bank's taking your farm back. You're out of your farm as well. Yeah, you got his independence, tough luck. And so what they did during Shays' Rebellion is, in order to take somebody's farm back, it required a judge to go ahead and sign an order. So what Daniel Shays did and some of his fellow, rebels, they surrounded the courthouse and they wouldn't let any judges in. If the judges can't get in, they can't sign the document. If they can't sign the document, they can't foreclose on the farm. And in Massachusetts, they appealed to the federal government for help, and the federal government couldn't do anything. And the framers are watching all this. And they're saying, this is not good. People are rising up. They're going ahead and taking over the courthouses, and the federal government so weak it can't do anything. They were paying attention to this and noticed what was going on. In Vermont, actually, they did it a little bit differently. In that case, the farmers did the same thing, except they took a quicker route. They actually burned the courthouse to the ground. It's like, enough of this standing outside the courthouse. We're going to burn the damn thing down and say, we'll be back. We'll see you later. And so that's so the framers are... James, are you shuffling? No. That looked like a shuffle.
So we can't really...
Okay. Very good. Okay. So we have the weak federal government. We have a bad economy. We have people rising up. And then the last thing here, and this is kind of intangible. It's not like something particularly obvious, but it's worth noting just sort of for psychological reasons. If somebody goes ahead and you're talking to a bunch of people and they ask somebody, where are you from? Someone says, I'm Canadian. Where are you from? I'm from here. And then they say, where are you from? What are you? How do we usually respond to that? I'm an American. Back in the day, they wouldn't have responded with American. They'd say, I'm a Virginian, right? I'm a North Carolinian. I'm a Vermonter. Apparently that's what they're called. I don't know what people from Massachusetts are called. Massachusetts, or I don't know. But they're that. People didn't really identify their connection, their emotional connection, in the same way that we have emotional connection to the country. How many people think of themselves as Californians? Right, a little bit. More American or more Californian? What would you... American, right? It's like we don't identify with the state as much. I've been here my whole life, right? But I don't think of myself as a Californian. I'm a Californian, but that's not how I think of myself. I'm an American. Back then, the connection, the people's emotional connection was really to the state. If you ask them, what are you? They say, I'm a Virginian. And so, for all these reasons, sort of, the Articles of Confederation seemed to sort of not work. And so eventually what happened is they abandoned the Articles of Confederation, got together and wrote the Constitution of the United States, but again, the second Constitution of the United States, because the first one, the Articles of Confederation, didn't work. And we'll pick that up in the next lecture.